If you observe how racial issues are discussed in modern media environments, a pattern begins to reveal itself. The loudest conversations are rarely the most thoughtful ones. The most visible debates are rarely the most nuanced. And the emotions spreading the fastest are rarely calm or reflective. They are anger, alarm, outrage. Racial conversations today often appear as if they exist inside a permanent emotional storm. Every few weeks, sometimes every few days, a new racial controversy erupts. A clip circulates, a comment resurfaces, a headline spreads. Within hours, millions of people are reacting. Positions harden quickly. People choose sides almost immediately. The temperature rises before understanding has a chance to form. This is not simply because racial issues are sensitive. They are deeply tied to identity, history, and lived experience. They carry genuine weight and real consequences. But something else is also happening. The environment through which these conversations travel rewards emotional intensity. Modern media systems measure attention. The more people react to something, the more visible it becomes. Content that generates strong responses spreads faster than content that encourages reflection. A large study conducted at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology found that emotionally sensational information spreads 6 times faster online than accurate and contextual reporting. Not necessarily because people prefer misinformation, but because emotionally activating content captures attention immediately. Anger moves quickly, nuance moves slowly, and racial issues, because they touch identity and moral concern, are particularly easy to frame in ways that ignite outrage. Once outrage begins, it spreads. People share stories that confirm their fears. Comment sections become battlegrounds. Algorithms notice the engagement and amplify the conflict even further. The result is a strange public environment where racial issues appear constantly explosive. Every week seems to bring a new racial crisis. Every day seems to produce a new conflict. Yet when researchers examine long-term trends, they often find something interesting. While racial inequality and tensions remain real issues, the emotional intensity of online racial conflict far exceeds the number of actual incidents occurring daily across society. This tells us something important. We are not only experiencing racial events, we are experiencing amplified reactions to those events. And amplification changes perception. When people are exposed to a constant stream of emotionally charged racial narratives, the mind begins to interpret society through that lens. Every interaction feels potentially hostile. Every disagreement feels like confirmation of a larger threat. Over time, this creates a psychological atmosphere of permanent vigilance. People begin to see each other less as individuals and more as representatives of opposing identity camps. This is where division begins to stabilize itself. History shows that large populations are far more difficult to influence when they are cohesive. When communities communicate across differences and maintain stable relationships, they develop collective clarity. But fragmentation weakens that clarity. When racial conversations are framed primarily as confrontations between opposing groups, attention shifts away from systems and toward interpersonal conflict. People begin arguing with each other rather than analyzing the structures shaping their environment. Another statistic helps illustrate the shift. Research from the Pew Research Center has found that political and social polarization in the United States has more than doubled in the past 30 years, with large segments of opposing groups now viewing each other not simply as wrong, but as threatening. This psychological shift changes how racial issues are processed. Instead of being examined as complex historical and social dynamics, they become emotional triggers within a larger conflict narrative. Certain patterns appear repeatedly in how these stories are presented. One common pattern is the use of wedge framing. Stories are structured in ways that highlight the most inflammatory elements of a racial incident. The most provocative comments, the most emotional reactions, and the most extreme interpretations are placed front and center. This framing guarantees engagement, but it also narrows the conversation. Instead of exploring context, people react to the most explosive fragment of the story. Another pattern involves symbolic enemies. Complex social issues become simplified into easily identifiable villains. A particular group, ideology, or identity category becomes the focus of blame. Once an enemy is defined, outrage becomes predictable. Predictable outrage spreads quickly. Meanwhile, deeper structural questions remain largely unexamined. There is also the constant emergency cycle. Each new incident becomes the next urgent controversy. The emotional temperature rises again and again. People barely have time to process one event before the next one appears. Psychologically, this creates a reactive environment. When the nervous system remains in constant activation, the brain prioritizes immediate reaction over long-term analysis. People respond emotionally rather than strategically. This dynamic mirrors something psychologists have long observed in unstable environments. When individuals are kept in a reactive state, their ability to step back and analyze patterns decreases. Fragmentation creates instability. Instability reduces clarity. Reduced clarity increases controllability. None of this requires hidden conspiracies. It only requires systems that reward attention and narratives that reliably trigger emotional reactions. Racial conflict, because it touches identity and moral values, becomes one of the most efficient emotional triggers available. Outrage spreads. Outrage drives engagement. Engagement amplifies division. Division produces more outrage. The cycle feeds itself, but awareness interrupts the cycle. Once people begin to recognize how emotional amplification works, they gain something powerful: the ability to pause. Instead of reacting instantly to every racial controversy circulating online, they begin asking deeper questions. Is this story giving me context or simply provoking me? What parts of the situation might I not be seeing? What conversation would emerge if people step back from immediate outrage? These questions do not deny that racial injustice exists. They do not silence legitimate concerns. Instead, they restore something that reactive environments often remove: perspective. Because when individuals stabilize their attention, something remarkable happens. They begin to see patterns instead of sparks. They begin to recognize how emotional amplification shapes perception. And once those patterns become visible, it becomes far harder for media environments to keep people permanently on edge. Clarity spreads more slowly than outrage. But once people begin to see through the emotional fog, it becomes much harder to divide them.